few days ago, we talked about the University of Wisconsin Badgers and how their season just recently came to an end. And as a result, we talked about the three big NHL prospects that do exist within that system. We talked about Turcotte, we talked about K'Andre Miller, and we talked about Caufield. We talked specifically about the options that these three players had in regards to next season, whether or not they would stay with the University of Wisconsin Badgers, sign an entry-level deal, play pro, play in the NHL, play in the AHL, play wherever. But I wanted to focus more on Cole Caufield in today's video because there were a few radio hits that I was listening to that actually kind of bring up some good points. And I have been getting a lot of comments that suggest other things, alternatives, you may say, to the ideas that we talked about in my vlog a few days ago where we talked about these three prospects. So Cole Caufield, we already talked about this, but just to reiterate the points that we made before, he was a point-per-game player for the University of Wisconsin Badgers as an 18-year-old. He's a guy who scored a whole bunch of goals. He's a guy who was a point per game. He led the team in points, and he was probably their best offensive player in regards to just the overall package that they were able to bring. Goal scoring, playmaking, Caufield did it all, and it's something that a lot of Habs fans watching this season weren't necessarily too surprised with because, hey, the guy broke Ovechkin's U18 goal record, or he tied it, last year. The guy is supposed to be a really lethal offensive scorer. But the thing is, Wisconsin was a bad team, and they were last in their division. They made the playoffs because everybody in their division makes the playoffs automatically, but they got swept, and in the two games that they played against Ohio State University, they were outscored 11-2. So that's not great. Cole Caufield in the 9-1 loss in Game 1 was a -5. And we talked a little bit about what Caufield can do next year, whether or not he goes back to Wisconsin, whether or not he signs a contract and he goes to the NHL, or if he goes to the AHL. But the other option that I didn't consider, and I didn't actually talk about until people pointed it out in my comments, is the idea of Cole Caufield going to the OHL and playing for the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds, who did draft him a little bit ago and who do have his OHL rights. So what exactly does this mean? What exactly do I think is the proper way to go about it? And what do I think is going to happen? Well, let's take a look at the one that probably seems the more likely out of the four, just because of how easy it would be to pull off: staying in Wisconsin. Let's talk a little bit about that for a minute. People in my comments, and people on Twitter, people on Reddit, were very not too keen on the idea of Cole Caufield staying with the Wisconsin Badgers, mostly because of the points that we brought up in our video a few days ago. The fact that the three best players on Wisconsin, pretty much, or at least the three with the most star power, Turcotte, Caufield, and K'Andre Miller, all had the potential of leaving, kind of puts Caufield in a weird spot where, would you rather see Caufield go back to an already poor Wisconsin team that potentially won't have K'Andre Miller or Turcotte on it again to try and do things all by himself? Alex Turcotte has already been rumored heavily to being a potential signee for the Ontario Reign, the Los Angeles Kings farm team, in the next few days. And K'Andre Miller just wrapped up his sophomore season. He's a guy who already has 2 years of college hockey under his belt, and pro hockey seems like it could be the next step. But for Caufield, a guy who hasn't really been rumored to be signing or whatever, a guy who Mark Bergevin labeled as not ready for the NHL, and potentially a question mark in the AHL in the short-term future. Is that something that seems valuable? Cole Caufield going back to an already poor Wisconsin team that misses out on another season of Turcotte and Miller. Now for me, and speaking of my own experience, we talked about this before, but I think Caufield, if he goes back to the NCAA, he will become better. He will score a few more points, and he will find his groove a little bit easier. Even if he doesn't have Turcotte, even if he doesn't have Miller, I think Cole Caufield is a capable enough player to be able to go over to the NCAA in his sophomore year, even though he's 5'7", and still be able to do well. But I'm asking you the question. In my experience, we had a guy for the Vancouver Canucks. His name was Brock Besser. You might have heard of him. In his draft plus 1 year, he was really gosh darn good with the North Dakota Fighting Sioux. He was playing on the famous CBS line with Drake Caggiula, Nick Schmaltz, and of course, Brock Besser. On the back end, you had Troy Stecher over there as the right D-man, and you had a really good goaltender in Johnson stopping the pucks back there. That team won a national championship, and Brock Besser was labeled as one of the top NHL caliber prospects from that draft in 2015 just because of his tremendously good draft plus 1 where he was a freshman with North Dakota. However, the next year, Schmaltz left, Caggiula left, Stecher left, and Brock Besser was left to man the ship by himself. With a few new guys coming in, they got Tyson Jost from the BCHL. He came in, he was pretty good, but for the most part, Brock Besser was in a spot where his sophomore year was considerably worse, statistically speaking, than his freshman year. And a lot of that does have to do with the fact that his really good line mates departed. So, from my experience, Besser turned out okay, and he actually did turn into a player who is reliable today. But for Cole Caufield, I can definitely see the insecurities. To me, Cole Caufield being the solo star on a Wisconsin team is going to be beneficial because it shows him how to lead by himself. Corey Pronman of The Athletic over here predicted a Wisconsin exodus, and an exodus means a mass departure of people from a location. So Pronman believes that Turcotte, Miller, and maybe even Caufield are all going to leave, either by signing their entry-level contracts or going to the AHL. But I turn the question to you. What do you think about Caufield staying in the NCAA, and what do you think about the other options? Because the other options, we already talked about them. Laval, it's a different beast. The NHL, it might be even worse. Let's take a look at this radio hit over here on TSN 690. They had a clip of Ray Ferraro, where he was talking about how Caufield will have a very difficult time in the NHL right now. In this segment, Ferraro brought up Kaapo Kakko, who is also a young player, but who is considerably bigger than Cole Caufield. And he said that even Kakko was having difficulty becoming a full-time NHL player and adjusting to the NHL game. So, the perspective that was brought up on that radio hit is, if a guy like Kaapo Kakko, who's already over 6 feet and who is at 200 pounds, is having trouble adjusting to the NHL, what more for a 170-pound, 5'7" Cole Caufield? Things could be much different and much worse, frankly, for a guy like this. Which is why the OHL route is the other one that has brought itself up. Now, the arguments as to why Cole Caufield should go to the OHL entail a few things. It's, first off, the games played. They play way more games over there in the OHL. The schedule is very similar to an NHL style, where you play games, you're on the road a lot, and you're not really doing anything else. In the NCAA, you play about 36 games in a year, and you have a lot of time off to go to the gym, do your studies, actually be a college student, because it's literally NCAA hockey. So, people have been bringing up the idea of going over to the Sioux, because in the OHL, Cole Caufield will be really good. Caufield has already played against other minor competition. He did that in the USHL, playing with the USNTDP, and he was an absolute maniac, scoring goals like crazy. If Caufield goes to the OHL, I have no doubt he's going to lead that league in goals. He's going to get more than Arthur Kaliev. If Kaliev even is in the league next year, you know what I'm talking about. But Caufield is going to be so good if he goes to the OHL. But to me, it might be somewhat of a downgrade. Sure, the schedule is very tough, and the schedule is more like an NHL schedule, but the fact of the matter is Cole Caufield would be going from a season where he played 36 games against men, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 sometimes year-olds, to playing against other kids. Some guys who are only 17, some guys who are 18, 19, 20. To me, The gym time, the strength time, the conditioning time, and the free time in college, especially playing against men, is a little bit more valuable than scoring tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of goals against other teenagers. But that's just me. Again, I might be biased because I saw Brock Besser take a similar path where all the good players left and he still remained in the NCAA, and he turned out okay. But for Cole Caufield, I don't know if saying the NHL or the AHL is proper, and I don't know if the OHL is proper either. I'd be okay with him staying back in Wisconsin, and in the video we talked about a few days ago, I think if he did stay in Wisconsin and the other guys left, he still would be good, and it still would be a positive for his development. The last thing we want to do is rush Cole Caufield, and I think anybody who's watching this video can definitely agree with that. So comment down below what you think. Caufield is a very polarizing topic amongst Montreal Canadiens fans, and I know that for sure, so I know this video is going to get a ton of comments. Hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.